Hi, welcome back to Weird Worlds. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. The Conqueror is a psychological horror story that delves into themes of obsession, death, and the unsettling nature of the human mind. Set in a Parisian café, it follows the strange relationship between two companions. Richards, a disillusioned poet consumed by drink, and Graham, his concerned friend. Richards becomes increasingly fixated on a bizarre and terrifying vision involving a mysterious beetle. The Conqueror, by Robert W. Sneddon. The Thrill Book, July 1919. If ever there was a quaint pair of companions, it was Richards and Graham, who used to frequent the Café d'Harcourt on the Boulevard Saint-Michel, Paris. When Richards had been younger, he had wooed the spirit of poetry. Now he devoted himself entirely to the Green Lady, Absinthe. At the café, the students and their friends used to wager upon the number of glasses he would consume in a night. Graham knew of this wagering, and it annoyed him strangely. But habit being stronger than friendship, he stuck to his pallid, cadaverous friend. He was the one intimate Richards kept, this shabby, ape-like English ex-jockey who ran a tiny billiard room in a side street. Graham tolerated Richards because out of the growing confusion of his brain came certain biting, morbid truths which made him laugh. Richards was a sharp one. There was no denying, even if he did talk like a madman, and lately his mind had been running on the grisly terrors of death, terrors to be kept at bay. As for drinking, beer was his tipple. Only one of a pair of pals could go in for absinthe. Queer-looking fellow, Richards, thin with high cheekbones showing under the tautly drawn skin, the corners of his lips sagging and weary. Only his eyes were alive, though they seemed too large for the sockets. He let his hair grow too long and hang untidily over the collar of his old velvet jacket, too busy drinking and raving to pay attention to his appearance, but clever as they make them. Graham used to tell him, "Damn, if only you'd give up the booze, you'd knock 'em all to bits with your writing." Nothing he could say did any good, however, and he was alarmed to notice that his friend was growing more cadaverous, more taciturn, climbing out of their sphere of communication, and he had already begun to cast about in his mind as to the advisability of breaking off the association. He looked at Richards tonight. There was a curious abrasion on his forehead. He had drunk his 5th glass, and yet he was not affected by it. The bony hand, which held a cigarette on the level of the marble table, trembled slightly, motionless. What did he mean by that empty, soulless gaze at the mirror? It was more than queer. It was depressing. Nobody comes to a café to stare, and silence is uncomfortable after half an hour. The silence was unbreakable. He must be going. This was a fine way to pass an evening. What was he watching? What did he see? It was getting on his nerves. He must speak. He must ask, and before he knew it, he heard himself say, "What's the idea watching that mirror? You're always staring at it." Richard started, shuddered, and replied slowly, "Because my beetle is there. That's all, Graham, all." "What beetle are you talking about? Some new pet?" Graham said with a relieved sigh. It was only a beetle which attracted him, something crawling. He opened his mouth in a laugh, but checked it suddenly as Richards turned on him with a frown. "What is it, old man?" he demanded anxiously. "Anything wrong?" Richards turned his head slowly away and resumed his staring. Graham's spirit rose in rebellion. Was he going to let himself be treated with this contempt? Whatever had possessed him to pal up with this crazy man? He ran over the reasons in his sullen mind, but at this hour none of them seemed logical. "Look here, Richards," he commenced coarsely, the blood mounting to his forehead. "None of that with me. Surely I'm a damn sight more interesting than any beetle." Richards turned sharply and looked at him. His hand rested on the edge of the marble top, and he drew his forefinger up and down it, as though deriving a sensuous pleasure from the cold contact. "I'm sorry, Graham, I should feel sorry to lose you. You'll forgive me, but this beetle of mine, Yes, what about him? Asked Graham, shaking off his grievance. After all, Richards wasn't such a bad chap. Bit dreamy, and had to be humoured. Richards looked at him earnestly. Graham, he said slowly, I think that in your narrow little penthouse of a soul you understand me. Graham nodded. That was a queer beginning, but no doubt well meant. If that is so, you can see something of the working of my brain. Not at all, eh? You're a bit above me at times, Graham mumbled. Then let me tell you of something which happened to me the other day. He hesitated with an appealing glance from his projecting eyes. Oh, go ahead, Graham assured. Do you good to tell it. I was wandering. I get fits of wandering through the day. There's nothing to do, and I like to moon about till evening in the café. Have you ever felt that the daylight was full of horror, as if a great searchlight was beating its questioning rays on your naked soul and showing its deformities to a sneering world? The city is no place for me then. It is full of shapeless things with the bodies of men and women, decayed senilities, pretty outsides of creatures ripe to the rotting, empty skins that have held conceit of beauty. All these rustle past as you walk in a city. I seek the country when I feel like that. It is fresh, and the air is pure, clean and wholesome. One day last week I went to, I don't know where. I don't know if I should recognize it again if I saw it. Ah! There he goes. Graham started as Richard's glance went eagerly to the wall. Yes, he said as if to a tired child. I see. They have marshes there. I remember the marshes best of all. There was a little blue flower which held out its friendly hands to me. And there was a stone wall. Green mosses grew along it. I nearly trod on a lizard. He stopped inarticulate. Graham yawned behind his hand. What about the lizard? He asked, lighting a cigar hastily. What did it do, old man? You see, when I saw him lying there, I felt inclined to run away. I wish I had. Him? Graham interjected with a sudden shudder. The body, Richards emphasized. I wish you'd listen. I am, but you said nothing about a body. Didn't I? Well, the body was lying there in the shadow of the wall. I thought he was sleeping till I bent over him. I almost began to fancy I had murdered him, but I hadn't. Why should I? I had no grudge against him, so I couldn't have killed him, could I now, Graham? Oh, Lord, no, ejaculated Graham. He put his hand up to his brow. It was wet. Decidedly, this fellow gave him the creeps. When was he going to give that cynical grin of his and croak? I frightened you that time, eh? Still there he was lying, Richards monotoned. His hat had a dent in it. I shoved it off with my cane, and it rolled a little way. It had a red silk lining with the letters WGR in gold stuck in it. My initials, Graham. Queer, eh? Some hairs sticking. Wasn't a pretty sight. I turned him over. One hand was clutching the grass. Have you ever imagined seeing your dead self? It's funny. I laughed. It was so ludicrous that I should be looking at myself lying there with a hole in the brow, just there. Then it made me quite sick. I felt ill when I thought that I had laughed. Graham shrank away from him. That was the curious part of it. There were three of us, the dead man, the man who laughed, and the man who wondered and felt physically ill seeing those other two. I couldn't make it out, and the sun shining down so brightly. Then all at once, as I looked at the dead man, his face changed. It wasn't me, it was another, someone I didn't know. Queer thing. I didn't think of the risk. They might have thought I had dirtied my hands there with murder. What did you do? Did you leave him? Graham asked, licking his lips nervously. It was then I saw my beetle creep from there, the hat. See, there he is, over on the wall. Graham looked sharply in the direction of the pointing finger. For the first time, he realized that there was a real beetle which crawled stealthily up and down the wall. He shuddered. Good Lord, he quavered, gaping at Richards with eyes that asked mutely and found no answer. That's the little fellow, my little soul. Do you understand, my soul? Richards continued in a whisper. He's always there when I come into the café. I have to take great care of him. When he goes, I go too, like that. He snapped his long fingers as though snuffing a candle. When he left the hat, I knew him for myself. A crawling creature. That's he. That's me. He knew where to come to find me. He's king of them, eh? Crafty king of the beetles. Graham tried to rise. His limbs refused to move. He seemed to be bound hand and foot, seated, looking through a peephole into a chamber whose vaulted darkness was peopled with unknown horror. King of the beetles. He'll conquer them all, even as I will conquer this crumbling frame of mine. I'm not afraid of the struggle, yet I come here every night to watch him, guard him. But why should I? If he has to fight, let him fight it out himself, my champion against death. Death. His voice rose to a thin whisper that seemed to master the noise of the café. Graham felt it strike his ear and recoiled as though from a blow. He was suddenly impelled to look at the wall. He knew he must shriek and could not. It was as if he had been planted on a desert isle with this madman, remote from human aid. From the corner of the mirror, another black thing, a second beetle, was descending with a menacing approach. He glanced at Richards and found his face was working convulsively. "It comes, Graham," he seemed to say, though no sound came from his lips. "It comes." Graham turned his back the better to see what was going to happen on the wall. It held him intensely. He recognized the first one, Richards, by a tiny red spot on its back, quite perceptible at that distance, and by some freak of the imagination, the mark reminded him of the hole in the skull. The beetles met. They recognized that they were foes, for with a spasm of ferocity they engaged, fastening their strong mandibles about each other's legs. It was a wonder they did not fall from the wall. Once, Richard's beetle dropped a few inches. Graham started as he heard his friend give a low laugh. Was it possible he had confused the two beetles? He would tell him his mistake when it was over. It would be something to laugh at. Graham began to lose his fear. The sporting in him came to his aid. He felt as if he were watching two wrestlers, two pugilists, two wild beasts tearing each other with bloody jaws and foam-flecked skins. He clutched the arm of his chair. He whispered to himself, "The little un wins. He wins. No, he's getting it sore. No, shake him again. Go on, go on." He forgot all else. The café and Richards had vanished. He did not see Richards sitting with the face of one who opens a closed door and beholds his fate grisly with welcome. "God," he said to himself, "they're putting up a real fight." Still, the struggle continued. The bigger beetle, or were they of one size? He could not tell now, was winning. Give it him now. A good bite for old Richards. Another. That's the style. Another. Tumble him on his back. He was sure the red-marked one was winning. Old Richards would be thinking he was losing. "That's it. That's it." He heard himself cry out joyfully. "Your beetle wins. By God, Richards, he's won. Knock the other one clear off the wall." He turned with the words on his lips, his blinking eyes ablaze with excitement. But the man beside him gave no reply. He was crouched up in his seat, conquered by the foe he dreaded, death. End of The Conqueror by Robert W. Sneddon.